and Indian philosophy. He taught for some 26 years at the University of Hawaii in 2018 and 2020. And his teaching and research, he brings to table, analytic classical Indian, especially Nyaya, Buddhist, and Kashmiri Shaivism, and continental philosophical traditions into dialogue. One of the leading thinkers in modern times, world across and within India. And his presence, makes a difference to this seminar. Professor, thank you so much for accepting our invitation, being here. And I can quote, several of his works, co-edited volumes, and then his own publications. A book on negative existentials and fictional discourse, an introduction to 20th century Western epistemology, and that's in Sanskrit. Very few scholars in India are contributing to the schools of philosophy in Sanskrit. And generally, many of us, as we know, we are well located in one school of thought. In one school. I'm doing Vedanta, or you're doing something Nyaya, you're there. And then you're not associated with the Western counterpart, another school from the Western world. And to be equally, authoritative in both the worlds, in both the fields, that's an added, value that he brings to his writings. And 7 books of philosophical essays in Bangla, and most recent focusing on philosophy of food and clothing. His co-edited volumes with Professor Matilal and with Strawson, and his work on Apoha Buddhist nominalism, again another co-edited volume, and Mahabharata. Now, we can go on. So it's better that I leave the rest of things for you to further explore, as you already know him. Professor, again, thank you so much, and I welcome you for this talk, and it's yours. Please.
Before Kanchana begins, I have to say something about, I am a retired person also, but my teacher, whom I imitate in many other manners, although I'm not a chain smoker, Michael Dummett, he wrote to me 3 years after his retirement, expressing frankly his irritation that since I retired, although I stay in Oxford, nobody, I cannot teach, no, I'm not involved in any PhD students, but all over the world, like meteorites hitting a planet, I get these invitations, and if I were teaching, I would not have so many invitations. So he wrote to me, I want to retire from my retirement. So I have retired from my retirement, and I teach normal undergraduate classes in Ashoka University.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Nataraju and Professor Smita, for this privilege of being here to chair this session. And I invite Professor Chakrabarti to make his presentation, and we can go on for an hour. He can speak for an hour, and then we can have some questions after that. So it is now 12:45, and we can go until 1:45, and then we'll have some questions, and that's it. Thank you.
I don't think I'll take all 1 hour. There's a limit beyond which you cannot stand between people and lunch.
Right.
So, I call it Immanuel's imagination, Kant's pervasive and innovative use of the concept of imagination in epistemology, ethics, aesthetics, and politics. In many of his writings, and more are coming out now in big volumes from the Cambridge series, especially in a big volume which is called Metaphysics, his metaphysics lectures, there is a lot about the psychology of the imagination, that people didn't know about before. And of course, there's this whole series of Nachlass, which came out after his death in German and recently English translation called Reflexionen. So the reflections are a great source. I haven't used them. What I have used, I have given photos of later on, but I start with first critique B151, definition of imagination. Imagination is the faculty of representing in intuition an object even when it is not present. Okay, very simple. Before I read Kant's definition, in my sort of adolescence, I was very fond, I still am, of Arindam Chakrabarti. He has a definition of kalpana, and that is imagination is the sigh. He calls it abhidyamane dirghashar. So it is the sigh of the absent. Now that's very poetic, but it's also an illustration of productive imagination to talk about the absent sighing, right? So, of course, the way to ruin the metaphor is to say what he means is that when the absent becomes a source of almost a proto experience, as if somebody who is not here, maybe dead or maybe unborn, is breathing on your shoulder. But that itself, the definition of imagination, is an illustration of what imagination is. This never happens. Now, Bernard Friedberg, in a 2005 book, where's that book? Yes, Imagination in Critico-Practical Reason, about moral imagination. He called imagination the central nervous system of Kant's critical philosophy, all of Kant's. So it is not just, well, a little bit of thing in a small section called schematism, right? My logician teacher, Pranab Kumar Sen, wrote on one Bengali essay on Kant, and that was on schematism. And those of you who are interested in Sanskritic translations, he obviously with lifelong thinking came up with this very beautiful word for schema, and he called it kalparup. So kalpana and roop together, right? So David Schulman's magisterial work on Sanskrit poetics in South India and philosophy of imagination, bhavana and kalpana, that is also titled More Than Real. Please focus on the word more, right? Samantha Matherines, the greatest Kant expert in Harvard right now, much younger than us, 2024 book on Kant's theory of imagination is titled, and that's there in the second. I think again, if the lights nearby can be switched off, it can be seen more clearly.
So it cannot be. These are all serially connected, sir. If one goes.
Oh, okay.
Sir, these are
One
all
goes
serially
up.
connected. A point beyond this.
What about switching all of them? Okay, that's it. That would be like, when we taught in during the pandemic, then very often the students would not switch on their videos. I thought because of privacy reasons. So I would see a black square with their name. The real reason came out later because I would ask questions in the class, and when most of them who switched on their videos would answer, but the switched off ones, one day I got uh, the sound from their nose, sleep, as the answer to my question. So that must have been the reason. So what does imagination have to do with the essential human capacity of exceeding the confines of the immediately perceived particular? Okay, that's the more in imagination, goes beyond. How is an undergraduate exposure to the psychology of imagination would make you glibly say, well, what it sounds like a new thing, but it's actually taking on the reproductive imagination, that is memory. It is just taking memory stuff and putting them together. Rabindranath Tagore, Kant, they all denied that. Yes, the ingredients are made with memory, but you can exceed what and you can get to something that you've never been ever exposed to. Okay, and I'll give more examples of them. Examples themselves being the greatest contribution in any rational argumentation of conceptual study. Why do we need examples? What Kant calls, because imagination is not only a faculty of synthesis, which is needed and mediation between the unlike heterogeneous faculties of understanding and sensibility. Apart from the bridging function and synthesizing function, it is also exhibiting, right? So, how is imagination that faculty by which we not only bridge the sensory and the conceptual, but also more than intellectually and rationally, as if viscerally with the body, and practically can think, feel, and will beyond the limits of one's selfish skin. And this last comment about our being confined to our selfish skin and imagination liberating us from that will be important for the end of my talk. So, Kant's 3+1. At the end of the first critique, in the doctrine of method, and the beginning of his logic lectures, Kant would remark, quote, the field of philosophy, you can see the remark there on the screen, the field of philosophy, in this cosmopolitan meaning, philosophy meant for the world citizen, Weltbürgerlich, may be summed up in the following questions. In the critique, there were 3 questions. In the logic lectures, the 4th question was added. What can I know? What ought I to do? What may I hope? With which I'll end my lecture today. And elsewhere he writes, if all 3 questions of pure reason are asked, then the major question we are ready to answer. Although we shall perhaps never complete the answer, because philosophy, Kant says in the logic, will always remain incomplete. So that is why he says nobody can learn philosophy like you can learn a formula. Okay? Because there's nothing to learn. You have to do it, you have to practice it. And so the 4th question is, what is man? Okay. Man, following Kant, I would give, fools rush in where Kant hesitates to enter. So Kant said it's a question. I would like, by my reading of Kant for the last 40 years, I would like to answer provisionally. Man is an imagining, self-conscious, social, self-improving, therefore self-critiquing, freedom-seeking, embodied, action-loving being. Why action-loving? This I didn't get from Kant. Although Kant's, K.C. Bhattacharya and Kant himself says that the linchpin of his philosophy is neither first nor third critique, but the second critique, about which we had the paper by Appar. Is Appar here? Yeah. Where is he?
Easier.
Right. Yeah. Why did I say action loving? Just a little bit of Sanskrit etymology here. Fake etymology. Philosophical musings, a kind of imaginative etymology. There's a whole discipline for that, and that's called Nirukta, which is one of the 6 ancillary disciplines to study the Vedas. And the root text of that is by a man called Yaska. Yaska is a free imaginer. You can't, he just does, free play with imagination. Whatever he is reminded of, he will give that as etymology. It is no claim that historically is that real. That is the business of German neologists to debate Yaska. But Yaska doesn't care. He and the Upanishads before him derived the term ridaya. By ri means to steal from outside. Da is to give back. And ya is to move. And the heart does all these 3 things. He derives nara from the verb of dancing. Nrityati. So when you dance, now obviously, everybody is not Biju Maharaj. So, but they dance at the scope of doing things. Obviously, Yaska did not anticipate the COVID, which made couch potatoes out of our future generation of students who don't dance at work. But Nara Nrityanti Karmasu. And he is following Upanishad. 100 years you should want to live. Second verse of Isha Upanishad. By acting constantly. When nobody likes to do nothing. So, what about lazy people? Oblomov, that Russian novel about somebody who never got up from bed. Or depressed people. Depression is the greatest excuse for never moving from your bed. So, well, they act a lot mentally. They're doing all sorts of things in their head. So, that's the work of imagination. Most famous for his 2 faculty, sensibility and understanding, theory of knowledge, Immanuel Kant did develop a complex aesthetic and moral psychology of imagination as a bridging faculty. So now, in the first critique, I'll go through that very quickly. Immediately following the transcendental deduction of categories, that maddeningly difficult and absolutely crucial heart of the first critique, the indispensable role of imagination in passing on from concepts to judgments is described succinctly in the famous section called schematism. The pure concepts of understanding are by themselves quite heterogeneous from the manifold of empirical intuitions given through the receptive faculty of sensibility. So one of those faculties, understanding, is active, spontaneous, and it contributes, it gives. The other one, sensibility, is receptive, passive. It just waits for things to strike through the forms of time and space, and it comes in a chaotic way. Well, then how do you form judgments? So Kant says, so there must be something that is third, something that must be homogeneous with the pure categories and homogeneous with the empirical appearances. Now look at that. The greatest schism in Kant is between a priori and empirical. Imagination is both. How could that be? So, imagination provides us with time images, these are schema, of each of the pure concepts, which are in between the following binaries: particular versus general, experiential versus conceptual, personal versus universal. This third one makes a hand waving to the concept of sensus communis, and also in the rasa theory to sadharanikarana. So general. A beautiful example of particular versus general is in a just very sharp and bright, and you can think about this particular short story or writing, whatever you call it, by Borges for the rest of your life. It's called Argumentum Ornithological. It's an ornithological bird science based argument for the existence of God. It's a short passage. This is how it goes. I'm almost saying from memory. Verbatim. Starts. Imagine a bunch of birds, a flock of birds flying away. Nothing could be easier. We are doing that. Right? Some of us who live in Delhi or something, if you go to Tughlaqabad, there are these ruins, and inside the ruins there are these parrots. And they come out, you clap, and they come out like a flock, like a splash of green color. But he didn't say parrots, by the way. He just said flock of birds. Next sentence, Borges writes. Now, close your eyes and imagine. You've done that. The reader has done that. Now, tell us, how many birds are there? And then he argues. He says, it couldn't be one, otherwise it could not be a flock, more than one. There is no guarantee that it was two. That also sounds too little. It wasn't more than 10, perhaps. But between 10 and 2, there is a particular, because there could not be, you could not have imagined a flock of birds which are non-denumerable. Birds are denumerable. So in your imagination, there was a particular number. You just didn't notice. Oh no, I put everything in the imagination. Nothing could go without my notice. Really? Is that true? So then he says, there must be a truth about that. You don't know it. Nobody can know it. When there is a truth, God knows. Therefore, God must exist. Now, the last part may be a joke. It might not be, because Berkeley's proof of God is like that. Right? But it points at this notion. And this is true for fictional characters. In my fictional discourse book, the incompleteness of imagined objects is discussed. Starting from who wrote that? Mimesis and Make-Believe? Walton, Kendall Walton's work on fiction. So when you say Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle gives very deep details about, if you read, Bonapful's novels or, Premchand's novel, great details. Swan's Way, Proust's novel, great details. However much detailed it might be, there is no answer to the question, did Sherlock Holmes have a mole in his back or not? But he's imagined in the fictional world as a full human being. He either did or he did not. So imagination claims that it's not real, but the object imagined has all the features, only some features have been mentioned. So it is a particular. But like bird in general has no color, has no species, has no name, these flock of birds have no fixed number. So it has the perceptual character of almost a particular. K.C. Bhattacharya calls it Chaya Vishay. It's like a shadow object in the context of Kant. He talks that about shadow object in the context of our imagined self also, in self-knowledge. That the object that we come to know, either because it is a remembered self or because it is a future self that I would like to build, it is actually imagined. If it is imagined, it has incompleteness. There are features about which the binary, bivalent questions have no answer. And that's the. Now, if you say, then it's not knowledge. The knowledge is like that at that time. In fact, not only aesthetic awareness, moral knowledge, any judgment becomes knowledge only when imagination intervenes. So, Kant himself goes on to say, imagination thus is the faculty of synthesis, just as understanding is the faculty of rules. And without such synthesis, B196, without such synthesis, experiences would not even be cognitions, but would be a beautiful word, rhapsody of perception. I have trained a student in Ashoka University who has become more finicky and more fussy about analytic accuracy than me. So I read out the abstract that has been published and I asked, what do you think is making sense? He told me on the phone, this is how it is. He told me, good rhetoric, sir. Like lacking in argumentation. Like that's what he was saying. So, but Kant is not like that. He will justify, next sentence, he justify why rhapsody of perceptions. So there is something like a tune and dance of different sensations and images, but it has to be synthesized. And the first synthesis of apprehension and intuition, the second synthesis is synthesis of reproduction and imagination. So, but before that, in the beginning of the Analytic of Principles, Kant has this famous line. It's much better known than everything else. In fact, originally, Janardhan, my Guru Bhai under Professor Mahadevan, he wrote an Indian philosophy book which he wanted to call that. Later on, he wrote another book of that name. So, imagination, Kant says, is a secret art residing in the depths of the human soul. So, Kaneri wrote a book called Concealed Art of the Soul. Kant claimed to have discovered something no one has noticed and theorized before him. In fact, this is why, although Mathurin, I don't know how to pronounce her, Samantha Mathurin of Harvard, she claims that if there is a tug of war between which faculty imagination is closer to, she thinks it is closer to the faculty of intuition. Imagination is like a shadow sensory faculty. Kant keeps it completely in between. Because in concept formation, imagination is needed. But how exactly it functions, Kant himself says, the stratagems of which nature will never reveal to humans. This is in that passage, B181. Why is that so difficult? And he gives a simple example. And you can take that example even now. You have seen a Great Dane, a Greyhound, an Alsatian, a Doberman. You have seen a Chihuahua. And you show that a child these things. And the child develops the concept of a dog. what is the commonality? You don't mention this is the common feature of God. You cannot. Because most probably they are like family resemblances. But how most, of course, the child makes mistakes. Even zoologists make mistakes for a long time. I mean, Indians thought that, whales were fish, but we know that they are not fish, etc. But how we form our most basic concepts is something that philosophers need to work in every age. Aristotle started it. And this, and that's why as a category, Nyaya Vaisheshika people don't have the category of concept. They have universals out there. Frege's concepts are like universal, they are objective, they are not mental. But as a mental content, distinction between an image that you have of something. Suppose I tell you, what is your image of a nerdy professor? Is that your concept of a professor? No. Why? For a simple reason. It is possible, literally, that after hearing from you a difficult, you are a math teacher, you have told me what is integration in calculus. I first didn't understand. Now I understand. I can literally correctly claim the concept that you have, I have that concept. I can never say that about an image. The concept is not an image, ever. Right? K.C. Bhattacharya, in the studies in philosophy, has a neglected, perhaps nobody ever reads it. Just before the essay called Reality of the Future, in the second volume of Studies in Philosophy, he has an essay called Percept, Idea, and Image, distinguishing them. Right? So, it is really between general and particular, an image. And we need them for this very sophisticated pure reasons concepts. Well, maybe not for pure concepts, one doesn't know what, but pure concepts might be derived or formed innately or something without borrowing the faculty from the faculty of imagination. But without imagination and schema, they cannot have any application. We wouldn't be able to apply the concept of a substance or the concept of number or the concept of, A is the cause of B unless there is imagination, which is perceptual, which is at the same time. Now, if you take resemblance as a transitive relation, then since imagination is supposed to be homogeneous with understanding and homogeneous with sensibility, sensibility should be homogeneous with imagination, with understanding, but it's not, it's heterogeneous. So very peculiar relation of homogeneousness here. Kant was very proud. Like Gottlob Frege lamented in a footnote that after he discovered the oddest and the most implausible implication of his theory of sense and reference of sentences, he said, I have discovered these two entities which are metaphysically real, called the truth value true and the truth value false. But unlike a chemist who can show what he has discovered, I cannot put them in my hand and show people. That's why nobody will give me credit for that. And they shouldn't, because till now, we don't know what the truth value false is. Right? But it's the natural consequence of the function argument, understanding of object and concept, of predicates in Frege. So Kant almost laments that nobody has noticed that that imagination is a necessary ingredient of all perception and all knowledge. Itself has, I suppose, never occurred to any psychologist. You can't have a perception without imagination. What kind of perception is that? That would be called nirvikalpaka perception. But even the Buddhists admit that every perception, every seeing that lends itself to saying, so that I can ask you, what did you see? And you can tell me a little bit, inadequately, imperfectly, but you can try. This is what I saw. And after that, if it is an ocean or something sublime, you might say, I can never tell you. I have a colleague I used to have a colleague in Hawaii who was always very excited about some weird things that he heard in midnight television. He would tell me, you won't believe. He would start. I said, well, don't tell me that. So he would say, you can't even imagine. I said, your wife will tell me. But, so eventually I did direct in Delhi University, a full 300-page PhD thesis called Can We Say What We See? Whether we can say or not, we need imagination for perception. Otherwise, I think the sensation which has no imagination, no judgment involved, no predication at all, is like a rash. You might have a rash, but that's not a representation of the world. Okay, you might have an itch. An itch is nirvikalpa. Of course, some people might say that, like during the COVID time, many people who didn't ever notice before that they were having breathing difficulties, right? They started saying, well, I have breathing difficulties because the concept was available. This is partly so why psychologists didn't notice, because its power has been limited by psychologists to reproduction only, I would say, only memory, imagination, no. And partly because they believe that the senses not only supply us with impressions, but also assemble the impressions. There's a reason why Kant doesn't call the datum, the given, with a definite description, but calls it a manifold. Manifold is still loosely scattered. It's not become a unity. It needs imagination-mediated concepts to become a unity. But I'm not teaching Kant to all these experts. But this is the use of imagination in the first critique. But this undoubtedly requires, that is perception, something more than our receptivity for impressions, namely a function for their synthesis. Footnote 150, very important. Footnote 150 in Critique of Pure Reason, A120. Now, in the second critique. Imagination makes possible the descent of the abstract a priori law of practical reason, like categorical imperative, synthetic a priori, from the law of reason to the faculty of desire. It enables us to translate the categorical imperatives. Only the first sentence is Kant's, then my own elaboration of it. It enables us to translate the categorical imperatives of pure practical reason into sensible embodied practice. Our intellectual understanding that reason dictates never to treat another person, even a murderer apparently, as a mere means by one's actions. Because I myself cannot bear to be treated that way, would never translate into felt empathy. These two things lie side by side in us. The Mahabharata definition of dharma says, Natat pareshu sandatyat pratikulam jatatmana. That which you cannot bear, which is unbearable to you, never ever inflict that on others. We have morality. But because we lack visceral imagination, somebody insults me, I cannot tolerate that. I feel like revenge. I feel like counter insult, humiliation. That hurts me. I may be a pacifist. I don't take revenge. I might, like Jesus, go and, tell him, like, insult me more, which I think is a kind of mean thing to do. Because it makes him feel inadequate, as if his humiliation was not strong enough. But the thing is that I have the memory of that humiliation. And then on another occasion, I lose my temper. If my imagination of that was such that when I'm humiliating that person, another person, I who was humiliated in the past, it was hurting me as it was hurting me when other people were doing it. I would not have done it. But we do it. And we say, oh, I forgot how it hurt me. But that's me. Now, our intellectual understanding that I should not inflict on others what I cannot tolerate myself can never translate into felt empathy and actual ethical practice without the capacity to imagine vividly and with embraced precarity. The precariousness that that person is feeling, the vulnerability, I have to embrace that. What it is that I would feel. In fact, I will add here something from a Buddhist moral psychologist called Shantideva in a book called Bodhicharyavatara. Shantideva, in his classic of Buddhist ethics, Bodhicharyavatara, calls this capacity of imagination, moral imagination, exchange of place between self and other. Literally that, right? He doesn't give the shoe analogy in others' shoes, but he says, Paratma Parivartana, right? But he goes one step further, which is very hard. He says, forget about becoming a Buddha, awakened ever. You will never awaken unless you practice this. You will never be fully happy also in your life. Nanama sadhyam buddhatvam. You will never have Buddha by awakening. Samsare bikutas sukham. In samsara, how will you have sukham? Unless swasukhasya anya dukkhena parivartam akurvat, which is you are happy, you are at a privileged position. You are Abraham Lincoln, you own slaves. Nobody whips you if you make one mistake in your domestic chores. Now, your imagination is such that Abraham Lincoln might, in a moment of enlightenment, experiment with imagination and say, okay, take my happiness, swasukha, my own happiness. Give me your dukkha, anya dukkhena, parivartam, barter, strange barter. Now, if Kant is rigorist, this is like brazenly utopian, right? But that's the Bodhisattva idea. And I want to say, at the heart of Bodhisattva's practice is moral imagination, which takes the visceral form of exchange. Okay. In the third critique, before I pass on to the third critique, in seeing more, notice the title has my point that imagination gives us more than what we can get inside this selfish skin. more. And yet, she calls it seeing. So it is not just thinking. It is actually a kind of extended, almost like a yogata perception, or alaukika perception. It just occurred to me now. It didn't occur before. There is a certain kind of perception that the Nyaya talks about, which is called Samanya Lakshana Pratyasati, whereby you form a general concept, and through the concept, you have some kind of partial perceptual access to all the fires and all the smokes. This may sound absurd, but this is how ultimately the Charvaka skepticism about inference is answered. Although Nayayikas are very fair, good Nayayikas like Jayanta Bhatta, and they have recorded the Charvaka's mockery against this answer. That mockery is, untranslatably beautiful in Sanskrit. They say, so now with perception, you know a universally quantified sentence to be true. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire. Because you have through Samanya Lakshana, through the universal, imaginatively perceived all the particulars. Then he says, okay, you are an omniscient guy. Why do you need inference? All of this was to support the universal premise of the inference, the vyapti. But he says, ye tu pratyakshato vishwam pashyanti bhavadrisha kim divya chakshusham esham anumana prayojanam. Why do you need anumana? So the debate goes on. But there's a beautiful example in Critique of Practical Reason by Kant, and one after another in Pedagogy. Even fictional examples, Kant says you need that for any kind of moral training. And that's all imaginative. Now, it so happens that Kant is actually here mentioning the actual case of somebody called Norris, which happened in Germany. But we don't know that. But Kant is putting it in his book. Before a humble common man, in whom I perceive rightness of character in a higher degree than I am aware of in myself. I am a good guy, but I read in a story about Shantidev who would exchange his, or somebody who did that. Right? What happens? My spirit bows down. This was discussed in Apar's paper, that's why I was asking. Whether I want it to or whether I do not, it bows down like, like seeing a cockroach, people might jump, right? Like that, I bow down, whether I want or not. This is the perceptual quality of imagination. Why is this? Kant says. Critical practical reason. His example holds before me a law that strikes down my self-conceit. It makes his theory even more complicated. Not because it pleases me. I don't admire the person whom I see. I said, I would have done the same thing. I don't admire that person. I may like such a person. But this is something I feel I am unable to do. In the Analytic of the Sublime, Kant says, my recognized inability gives me an inkling of a deeper ability that I have of appreciating the greatness of this. And he says, his example holds before me a law that strikes down my self-conceit when I compare it with my own conduct. Right? And I see observance of that law and hence practicability. Proved before me in fact or in exhibition of an example. the law made intuitive by an example strikes down my pride. And this Harvard Kantian, she explains beautifully. All too briefly, we can explain, on Kant's view, the feeling of respect here, on which your paper was, is complex feeling that involves, on the one hand, a negative feeling of displeasure at the recognition that the moral law has priority over what we care about as sensible beings, and on the other hand, a positive feeling of esteem for the moral law and elevation. It is through the imagination that the displeasure, oh, I'm not like that. That displeasure, and it shatters my pride that I'm a morally perfect being or something. At least on one occasion. No, I'm not. And this humility gives me a kind of respect for the law, a respect which is not interested. It is connected to the disinterested delight that will come in the third critique. So, in the third critique, Kant's best known deployment of imagination in the concept of free play, disinterested delight, and purposiveness without a purpose are founded on this yet to be fully researched power of productive imagination, which links beauty to morality. And here I will indulge in a little longer quotation from Kant. There's a whole section 59 of the idealism concerning purposiveness. This is in the 4 moments in the beginning part. And it's called on duty as the symbol of morality. Okay. And Kant says, now I maintain that the beautiful is the symbol of morally good only because we refer the beautiful to the morally good, and we all do that naturally. Of course, I don't know about, the beauty in the fashion industries, whether that is referred to the morally good or not. But Kant was talking about a certain kind of thing. And he says that he's referring to the universalizability of the liking, because he says that aesthetically, if you are appreciating it, not acquisitively, like the problem with appreciating a good dress or a great sari is that it is not aesthetic, because you want to have it. If you don't want to have it as an artwork, that's why art collectors' appreciation of paintings, Kant would not call aesthetic, because they want to possess them. So when you say a disinterested delight, in the case of Sublime, a delight which is caused by a little bit of pain, fear. Okay. And not like the pain that Bergson thinks must accompany laughter. Kant's theory of laughter is different, which doesn't have to do with mild doses of pain. He says, why is it moral? Because the moral is universalizable, sadharanika. You can depersonalize it. Not just me. If I really appreciate something moral aesthetically, I call other people. And even if I find all my friends hating me, like I like the painting that later on in the afternoon, my student Trisha will talk about, Goya's painting, Saturn eating his own son. A disgusting painting. I like it, and I don't think it's a perversion on my part. Right? I would like not to stop until I can persuade my art connoisseur friends, how could you not like it? I would say. But they may dislike it. But Kant says there's a claim, and this claim of universalizability is the link with morality. It's not actual morality, it's a symbol of morality through the universalizability. It's a very complex thing. I would give another example that you may not know very well. Although if you have read the Critique of Practical Reason, you would know it. Kant's best jokes come in his Critique of Judgment, but the best of the best is in the hardest, abstract, dry part of the Critique of Pure Reason. And our aesthetic appreciation of that, even if you disagree with it. Now, people like Donald Davidson, also at the end of their life, said, whatever Tarski might have done, in natural language, truth cannot be defined. Truth cannot be defined. Meaning can be defined in terms of truth, but truth cannot be defined. So the last paper that he published in Journal of Philosophy, before his death, Davidson, is called The Ugly Urge to Define Truth. Davidson was steeped in both Plato and Kant. So, at the center of the Critique of Pure Reason, there is a discussion of can truth be defined? And Kant says that the ambition or the desire to define truth universally, generally, all true statements, all true state utterances or beliefs have what they have in common, the truth. So this desire is like the desire of milking a male goat. So he says anyone who asks for a definition of truth is trying to milk a he-goat. And anyone who waits for an answer to that question is like holding a sieve underneath to filter the milk of a he-goat. So, what is he doing? He's imagining a scenario which has no similarity with the truth context. But he's making a point. The concept of continuity by an exaggeration in Sanskrit Alankara, this will be called Atishayokti. Impossibility of, milking a male goat. But there's a better example in the Critique of Practical Reason, which is preceded by a story about an Indian. But I won't read it out. One joke is that Kant says, this is in the laughter part, in the humor paragraph, the rasa of humor. Kant says, let us explore why are we shocked into humor when we hear the following. And there is an Indian guy who is having a dinner and very ingratiatingly with a colonial Englishman. And he is feeling very lucky and he has never seen a beer bottle being opened. And the Englishman wows him by opening the beer bottle and all the froth comes out. And the Indian cannot stop saying, oh, amazing, 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 all through the dinner. So finally, in order to snub him, the Englishman, these are all Kant's words, says, what is so amazing about it? Have you never seen the bottle? He said, no, I was not amazed at the froth. I was amazed at how all of that you put in yourself. To the Englishman. Now, then Kant gives another example, which actually is almost like a rasabhash. Should not be allowed. About grief, somebody's grief. He is giving an example of a joke. He's not cracking the joke. It's an example, illustration of what humor can, how humor is created. And there is a little bit of a conflict, contradiction involved here. So there is a man whose aunt was old, and she had written a will that all her huge amount of property and wealth and real estate will go to this man when she dies. So when she dies, because this man is now very rich, he calls and employs the most expensive professional mourners, rudalis, who come and mourn and grieve. And then they cry and weep and talk about the dead. And this man is frustrated. He's whispering, what can I do? The more I pay them, the more they're cheerful. These grievers, I pay them to cry. But because I'm paying them high, they're the business of the late lamented aunt gets completely ignored. And this whole thing, now I don't want to explain it, but what is the role of imagination here? Now, this is a big phrase to make it understand. What is the point of these imaginative examples and what you do in good literature, in dance? Kant's best known deployment of the imagination is the concept of free play, disinterested delight, and purposiveness without. If we have to do paratma pravartana, exchange place with them, perception, inference, and linguistic testimony do not afford us any empathic and action prompting emotional insight or arthi bhavana that stops us from inflicting on others such harm and hurt as we cannot bear to suffer ourselves, but we are inflicting on others all the time. Imagination is the uniquely human power of synthesis, counterfactual extrapolation, comparison, redistribution, and visualization of what is more than factual, more than real, seeing more. Just as we need quasi-perceptual, vivid imagination of the unsensed backsides of the cup or a pot, and the bottoms of objects and societies, the drawn view of things, and the side view, and the behind view, and the bottom view. These we imagine when we see the fronts of things. Similarly, we need to imaginatively, immersively experience the absent, unexperienced future and unperceived past of other people and communities. Why has the murderer become a murderer? Angulimala didn't kill, but he just chopped off fingers, 1,000, and put them on his neck. He had a conversion experience. He became a monk. Buddha said, you can change. But he made him go for 1 year to beg in the villages without any weapon. And every day, people would throw stones at him. And he would come back bleeding. Like in a poem by Tagore, where a rather cruel king taught his very fashionable and luxurious queen a lesson. Koto dhon jay, Raj Mohishir, ek prohore pramode, in that poem. Until we simulate possible scenarios in the form, what if they did this to us? In order to motivate less and less selfish, decreasingly other blind practical reasons. Our imaginations are our only ways of becoming more than profit maximizing plutocratic superpowers, of engaging in free play, of wondering at nature, which is mightier than technology, and cosmopolitan harmony, which may remain always a dream, and dream of a culturally decolonized world without black and bloody borders. I have only had the time to show the role of imagination in the three critiques. But what I'm hinting at in these last 3 paragraphs is there is a huge role of imagination in international politics, and Kant illustrates that in his Perpetual Peace. And here is one case where, for a short period, maybe 100 years, less than 100 years, unfortunately, Kant's vision was actually materialized. That is, the United Nations were established as a cosmopolitan international justice explicitly by invoking Kant's Perpetual Peace and the articles. So there is a project of political imagination in Kant and looking at the utopian role of the Perpetual Peace. And this is what Perpetual Peace Kant explicitly calls an ideal of reason. An idea of reason, you can asymptotically approach it. And maybe politically, you sometimes come very close and then come away. But eventually, you can always. This is perhaps the most urgently learnable lesson from the 3 critiques of Kant and Perpetual Peace at the current crisis of civilization. This is what, as human beings, we may hope against all hope and against all scientific statistical prediction and environmental doomsday scenarios and algorithmic dystopia.